Well, thank you everyone for joining us for this session. My name is Amir. I look after marketing for the international territories, which is basically anything outside of DACH for Personio. We're an intelligent HR software, basically an all-in-one solution, mainly for mid-market organizations, anything from 50 to 2,000, where we helped you with automating mundane tasks, reporting, and a lot of cool AI features. But I'm not here to pitch you. We're here to talk about how you should particularly pick the right HRIS solution for you, as well as your payroll provider. So we have here James from Phase3. I'll let him introduce himself, and then we'll dive into a bit of a Q&A.
Yeah. Lovely to meet you all. Thank you for joining the session today. So as Amir said, I'm from Phase3. We're an independent organization, so essentially we help customers to drive business outcomes from the technology that you've already purchased or that you're looking to purchase. So we help you to decide who in the room is the right people to be talking to for you in your organization. And then when you've selected that software, we help through integrations, help with the implementation process, help you with QA, project management, etc. So not the tech, everything else but basically is what we do. So we specialize in helping customers really drive value out of applications, and so AI is a hot topic right now.
Of course.
Yeah.
And recently James wrote a piece on how to be a better buyer of HRIS in 2026. As part of that article, you said you didn't want it to be another article that's just talking about how the AI is shaping up the workforce, but you went and wrote it anyway. And what made you finally put that pen to digital paper, as you put it?
Yeah. So we run a podcast called the HR Green Room, and we ask people to submit topics for that podcast. AI is obviously being talked about a lot. I mean, is anybody sick of hearing those two letters yet? Yeah. I did a session on this yesterday as well. But literally everywhere in this room, it's all people are talking about. And I thought what we try and do is demystify and give people the real information that they need when they're looking at buying technology. And AI is something which has been mentioned a lot. It's almost like vendors are saying, we've got to have those two letters on our website or people will think we're behind the times. So I wanted to cut through the bluster and basically give people something that's real, tangible to say, when we look at an AI, what should we actually be looking for? How could we implement it? And what are the things that people should look out for when considering buying AI in terms of how you actually use it? So I always try and give practical help and advice, and I think that was something that really focused me to write the article, to have something that you can actually consider and take away. And the important thing for me, and I discussed this yesterday about talent in tandem, AI isn't going anywhere, so we're all going to get sick of hearing the two letters. I did think about moving it on to B, but then the letter that comes after I is a bit problematic there, so you've got to be a little bit careful with that. But the purpose of having this discussion is HR professionals are in a unique position to help people partner with AI. So we have to be the people that design this partnership, not be the recipients of it, because IT decide that we need to use AI in the organization. So that was something else that kind of inspired me to write it.
And you mentioned you're at this kind of really nice junction between so many different types of organizations across the whole HR kind of ecosystem.
Yes.
You've probably sat through a lot of demos, you've identified what people are potentially evaluating. What's your perspective on if people are ready to act on these AI solutions, or is it still on, let's get a shiny demo, box ticking exercise to say, I know what I'm talking about? Like, Are people ready to actually implement it for everyday business?
Some are, and some aren't. And the key thing I would say here is what we've got to realize is whether we as an organization are ready or not, our employees are already using it. So they might be using ChatGPT or Claude, for example, in everyday work in practice. So whether we introduce that as the leaders of a business or whether we allow them to do that AI work themselves, it is going to be happening. And I use the comparison often that, can you remember when everybody got Blackberries for the first time? And you could have your email on your phone. And then we had to start thinking in HR about, well, what about work-life balance and people, being expected to be online all the time? And we had to come up with policy around that and think about what that meant in terms of connectivity. And is there an expectation that you reply to emails out of hours? AI is also driving that similar conversation in terms of what are the rules that we need to think about? What's the governance we need to put in place? What training do we need to put in place for people and how to use it? So it is more of a consideration in terms of how does AI land in an organization, and that's where the demos are important to answer the question directly, because as we said, everybody in this room is talking about AI. But AI's been around for a long time, hasn't it? If you've had, I remember the version of Netflix where you had a DVD posted to you, but Netflix moved on and they had the online version and it was giving you things that we recommend you might want to watch because you've watched something else. That's been an AI algorithm that we've known for years. AI these days is becoming more prominent in terms of its usage and what it can do. And in HR in particular, there are some key areas of applications, but readiness for AI is still a challenge because AI relies on good quality data. And that is the HR professionals' challenge in lots of organizations, isn't it? That the data isn't there.
I would say nightmare, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. It's if the data's not there, which is often what we're asked to do in HR, gather data, make sure it's clean, then AI is going to be making decisions based on misinformation or a lack of information. So I think when we're looking at demos, we need to understand what do we want the AI use case to actually be? Are we looking for an AI tool that will take away HR admin? Are we looking for an AI tool that will help managers through a recruitment process, for example? And you tend to find that the higher quality AI solutions are really targeted and specific. So CV parsing, for example, is something we've had around for a while, but an Ask HR feature within a platform might be less well developed because it's still not got enough information yet and the language models aren't quite there. So when we do system selection projects, we always say to customers, think about what is important in your use cases for AI, and then make sure you actually do get to tick the box to say, did it answer the question in the way that we expected?
That definitely makes sense. Talking about productivity and how mature AI is, in some respects, AI, we can break it into two camps. You have AI for productivity, which is slightly more mature, slightly more safe, and then now you have more AI on the execution level, so doing things on your behalf, which is a little bit more nuanced, less discovered, and potentially riskier.
Yeah.
Where do you see traction at the moment with organizations? How are they adopting AI? And what separates a good vendor where they're driving that transformational change versus the impressive demo category that we talked about?
Yeah. So I think I always reflect on this as AI being the co-pilot. So there is a theme that you will see often, and it's something I refer to a lot, it's in the article as well, the human in the loop concept. So human in the loop essentially means, as it says on the tin, AI can't do something for me without me checking it, saying I'm okay with it, and having an input into that process. Now, that's helpful if you're using it for things like drafting letters, if you're using it for outcomes, if you're trying to analyze data. It's useful to have that human in the loop to provide that context and that awareness. And I think from a HR perspective in particular, we know that what we do is risky for organizations, and so I would never want anything to go out of an organization's inbox that was purely written by AI when it didn't understand the human concept. So I think the human in the loop theme is something that we will see more and more in HR practice. There are other things that we have to consider as well. So we had a demo, Ella from Zealous, and this was last year at the same show. We asked it a question, for example. We said, I'm pregnant, what do I need to do? And it's really interesting because what I want to know as the employee is what is happening with that piece of data. Is the organization now aware that I'm pregnant? And are they going to do anything with that data? In the same way that after today, you're all probably going to get 5,000 phone calls from all the SDRs, from all these companies. You know, we've gathered your data whilst you've been here. That's what's going to happen next. What happens with the HR data? So there's got to be a real element of trust and governance in this. And a maternity example is probably a positive one, but what if I said to that AI tool, I'm feeling like I want to hurt myself today, for example. It's a very different conversation, and we've got to be really careful in terms of safeguarding, in terms of privacy, and making sure that the AI tools are actually representative as an AI tool so that the employees know that that data is or isn't going anywhere. So in terms of who's doing it well, I think that's a prime example where I would be asking my vendor, what happens when an employee uses this tool? Is the data stored anywhere, and can I access it?
Yeah, I think that takes us really nice to the next question, which was around, I assume you've sat through a ridiculous amount of demos and you know, product showcases in terms of how these types of tools could be implemented into HRIS solutions or workforces. What kind of separates the vendors that are driving real impact versus theoretical solutions that are nice to have? Like who's actually driving that change as a mid-market AI-powered player or type of solution?
I mean, I listed them in the article, so I'll let people read it. Personio obviously is one of them. And there are a number of different vendors that are doing this in different ways. So from a data analysis perspective, for example, I think Personio is one of the ones that are at the top of the list. Similarly with Sage from a data analyst perspective. From a human interaction perspective, Element Suite, which was purchased by Zealous, is another prime example there, where they really are in the flow of work, is the way they describe it, similarly with HiBob. And the really interesting thing is how AI is embedded within the everyday workflow. So I think in probably not the too far distant future, we won't log into Personio anymore and look around the system and go to pages and forms and query it. We'll be talking to a large language model which will answer the question that we logged into the system to get the answer to. So if I'm logging in to say, oh, I want to see the report because I've been asked what our attrition is in the last month, am I going to log in, run a report, download it to Excel, put it in a pivot table, or am I going to type in what was my attrition last month and get an answer? The likelihood is we'll see more and more the second half of that rather than the first half. Yeah.
And you used that word earlier in terms of humans being the pilot and AI being the co-pilot.
Yeah.
But then you raise this really interesting point in the article about if the managers are writing their objectives using AI and then the employees are responding using AI, is that productivity gain or is that reduction in kind of human interaction?
Yeah.
Where does that come from and where do we go from that point?
Yeah, I mean, I think there will always be lazy employees and lazy managers. You know, let's be honest. I think from a performance perspective, it can be a challenging conversation. So a tool that will help a manager to coach them in that conversation rather than write an objective for an individual will be much more beneficial. And what I like to see is the tools that are looking at performance reviews as more of a holistic view of employee performance. So how are they scoring on their employee surveys, for example? What's their sentiment? Are they looking at internal vacancies? Have they applied for a few? Where are they at in the 9-box grid overall? And from an objective perspective, what is the business objective? What are our OKRs in our function, for example? So pulling that data together, analysing that, and giving the manager prompts of what could be the suggested performance improvements based on more data is a more effective use of the tool. And with that kind of AI usage, what we're getting is we're freeing up the manager from doing that summarising and typing to actually having the conversation and being the manager in that conversation and the employee being the employee. The AI tools can be sat in the meeting listening to it if we want, and that's more and more common these days with Fireflies and Microsoft Copilot, for example, and then summarizing it afterwards. That to me is the biggest benefit, because the value in that is the conversation. The bit that's less valuable for the manager but is more valuable for us in HR is the conversation being recorded, logged, and us being able to see that it actually took place and it was a valid conversation. So taking the admin away and giving the manager the time to manage and the employee time to reflect is the biggest benefit.
At Personio, we actually recently went through our annual 360 review in terms of performance, and we created some very, very simple agents that we gave to all the employees to be able to just summarize their own self-reflection or peer feedback or manager feedback. But then it went through that scenario as you clearly described. So you can have more meaningful conversations than basically spending less time on the admin.
Yes. And I think the other thing on that as well is if we flip it on the other side of HR, what we also see a lot more recently, and this is in a lot of HR forums, how many of you have read a grievance and thought, that doesn't sound anything like that employee when they send an email? And I'm reading this perfectly articulated grievance that cites employment law that actually isn't that relevant. I read one a few months ago from an employee who was talking about the fact that they were overworked and they're using legislation that relates to unsafe workplaces due to poisons. And it didn't make any sense. It's quite clear to see that that wasn't written by the human. And I think again in HR, we almost need to use like they do in universities, an AI proofing tool to say how much of this was actually written by a person. And it's funny because you can see it, I think, sometimes when you're reading these documents, because there's a lack of context and then all of a sudden there's a sentence that's probably sometimes a bit misspelt, and it's very relevant to that case, but it doesn't really relate to the sentence or the paragraph before. So it's a real challenge that we have now within HR profession to actually understand if an employee's raising a grievance, is that the employee's issue, or is that the AI tool's issue where the employee's fed in a prompt and said, write me a really detailed grievance in relation to this matter? So we have to be able to use tools in HR to pull that out as well, to understand what the context behind that is and what the employee's actual issue is. Because it comes back to that point of, if a manager's doing a performance review by AI and the employee's responding to it by AI, no one's actually had the conversation. So in a grievance, I think it's HR's job to say, right, how much of this is actually your issue, employee? We want to make sure that we're responding to your grievance, not an AI's rinsed version of what your actual issue is.
I'm going to ask you a question we hadn't discussed before, just on the back of that conversation. So for this conversation so far, we talked about tooling quite a lot, how AI is helping with execution, productivity, etc. The tooling aside, how AI is being used in a workforce is essentially changing the whole shape of the workforce in itself.
Yep.
How we do work, how we're compensated, how we recognize success or we don't is changing.
Yep.
Do you come across HR managers and people leaders dealing with that challenge? And if so, what are some of the tips you may have for anyone in the room here? Again, tooling aside, but how they manage the change that AI brings to that workforce.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of scarcity mindset when it comes to AI at the moment, which is AI is going to replace me is the first fear that people often have. It might replace an element of my role. And a key consideration really with that is how much of that is actually true. Now, what we see from a lot of people leaders is that their future strategy for people actually looks at, do we need to grow the human function, or do we need to keep the human function the same size but massively enable them to have better skills and capabilities through augmented AI working alongside them? And I used this example yesterday, so apologies if any of you did listen to the session on this yesterday, but I worked in payroll first and then moved into HR after finishing my degree straight from school. And I am very familiar with a pivot table. Give me a bit of data and I'm happy. And as a COO, I have a lot of data from a lot of different systems. And something that's always escaped me is how APIs work and how data flows from system to system and where it sits in the middle and is it secure. So I spent a bit of time over a weekend vibe coding a new system that could pull all of that data together, build APIs to build it into one single data lake, and then I could interrogate that data. I would never have been able to do that if I didn't have the skill of the AI vibe coding tool. But the AI vibe coding tool didn't have my business context and awareness in terms of what questions I needed to answer. So for me, something that's important is who's going to be joining us in the next 6 weeks, what skills do they have, and how quickly can they add value to the business? That's something that I could look at lots of reports and read application forms and CVs and speak to managers and find out about, but I've got that data in a system, and I think that's where what we can see is the AI augmented my skills and awareness and gave me something that I wouldn't have had unless I'd spent 6 months and probably about £100,000 to deliver. And this is where I think it's really important to answer the questions of how do we do this. Yep. We can give people the tools, but we need to give them the training and development in how to use them as well. In the same way that you wouldn't give somebody a piano and expect them to be able to play it, people can prompt badly with AI tools, for example. So one of the things we do at Phase 3, we have a monthly hackathon. And what that is a group of people that are interested that come together across the organization, and we vote beforehand on what is a business challenge that we want to solve through the use of better tooling, better AI, and then everybody learns how each person would respond to that differently. We have a bit of a competition, and whoever comes up with the best solution, that's the one that gets developed further. And that's really useful to see. The tool that I use for vibe coding is different to what my colleague might use. And the prompt I write, my trick is I go into ChatGPT after writing a list of everything I want it to do, say to ChatGPT, give me a prompt to put into Bolt, which is my vibe coding tool, and that gives me a really good prompt to tell Bolt how to build it for me so that I'm not confusing it with human speak when it can be AI to AI. And I think that's, again, it's about how we elevate that. So as I said at the start of the session, I think the important thing for HR professionals in the room is understanding what that partnership can mean and being the author of the partnership, not the people that are having to respond to it down the line when IT have said, we're going to bring Copilot in and it's going to revolutionize our workforce. Well, how? And everybody probably sits in these leadership meetings where they say, we need to do something about AI, but we're not quite sure what that something is, or which tool we should use, or if I use Microsoft Copilot, it's not connected into this system, or this system. And this is the key thing I think we're going to experience a lot, is probably tool fatigue, to use the phrase. So I'm going to be asking my HR system one thing, my payroll system another, my finance system another, and none of them are connected. And that's where I feel the evolution of AI will come, that we will have that organization-wide tool that will allow us to query databases, structure data, and get answers to business questions that we weren't able to answer easily before.
And one thing that this kind of tooling brings, I think, is potentially having decision paralysis. There are so many scenarios, there's so many tools to choose. Where do I start? Because the possibilities, they say, is endless.
Yeah.
We went through a process similar to yourself recently. We had a hackathon week trying to get everyone immobilized in terms of using the toolings that we've given them. One tip that I was given to get started for the ideas I had was, first just look at one very mundane and kind of, let's stick to mundane. Just a mundane scenario. How do you do it manually today? What's the status quo? Just write down the workflow. And then as you're going through that and you've identified the end-to-end process, for me it was creating case studies, customer case studies. I need to go to this person, get this approval, write down the draft, blah, blah, blah. There's many different processes, different systems, different tools, etc. We had that down. Step after, look at, okay, which bits do I really want to automate? Once you have that down, then you have kind of like an ideal scenario you want to work towards. Then you can think about the tooling. So essentially, don't think about the tool first, think about the process first, and then see what tools are there to help you with those processes.
You've used a really important word there as well, which is automate. And I think a lot of people get AI and automation confused. So automation is a repetitive task that needs doing again and again that can be triggered, say, by a workflow. So as an example, you close a deal, you're in marketing, so I'll use a marketing example. You close a deal, we notify the whole business that a deal's been closed. I don't need AI for that. That's an automation that I can do for a workflow. I might use something like Power Automate if I'm in Microsoft. And a lot of leaders in these conversations are saying, we need to use AI to do this, and the question is, do we actually? Because the other thing that's really important to remember about AI is it is expensive. You know, the tokens that you burn through in using something like ChatGPT, if you're paying for it, it's not cheap. And if you're connecting that into other systems, the token usage does start to increase rapidly. So automation and AI should be considered separately, and really think about, if this is something transactional, it more than likely is something that doesn't need to be an AI tool. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'm just conscious of time. There is one big question that we have. So just a quick show of hands. Who's got a demo booked in the next 2-3 weeks, or had a demo during this session that had AI in it? Great. So the question is, as we've seen in the audience, there are people evaluating solutions that are AI powered. What's your top 2-3 key elements or questions they should be asking or looking out for to make the right decision?
Yeah. I think the phrase that I always use when we talk about system selection and demos is look for the steak, not the sizzle. And if your provider is demoing you AI, ask to step into the system and ask it a question yourself, because they are obviously going to type in the question that they know it gives a good answer to. And that's something that you should always do in demos. Put the system through its paces. Don't let them give you the beauty parade. And sorry, if people come to your stand, I'm sure you'll let them do this. But really do put the system through its paces and check whether or not it actually meets the requirement that you have. I think the second thing is ask them about governance. Where does that data go? Do they learn from your data? Are you happy with that? And then also consider what the use cases are. I've seen one HR tool that has an Ask HR tool within it that's an AI application, but that's only available to the HR team. Well, what's the point in that? HR aren't going to ask HR about HR. We need employees to ask HR. So, you know, just saying we've got AI is like a bit of a label that gets slapped onto a lot of systems these days. Really consider what are the user cases that you want to address with AI. And there are some really clear ones. In L&D, a lot of people in the room probably are L&D professionals, given it's sort of 75% of the conference. Personalization at scale is a prime example of a really beneficial use case for AI, and that's something that you can put through its paces with demos and looking at the interaction in terms of where I'm at in my journey as an employee is different to where somebody else is. What would this do for me in terms of my experience of learning? And I think another element to that is from a recruitment perspective. You know, you can have AI tools screening candidates by doing interviews if you wish, That's not everybody's bag, but for much kind of high volume, high scale recruitment businesses, that's really important. Actually, the first set of data that the recruiter might see is somebody who's been pre-qualified as an employee who is within a workable distance of the care home, for example, that they're going to be going to work in, can get there on a bus easily enough, and has the skills and capabilities to deliver that role. So there are some real use cases where it is beneficial, but the thing I would say on the flip side, not what to ask for, but what to avoid, is tools that are ambiguous about their use case and how they will add value to you and how they will be billed. Because as I said, AI can be expensive. So if it's token-based, usage-based, you need to understand how much put-through is going to be going through that AI tool to really understand the value that you could get out of it.
If I can add one more to that one is, maybe potentially always ask the question if the AI that they're introducing you to is native, which means something built from the ground up for that particular scenario that you're looking for, versus something that they purchased off the shelf and just added as an add-on. That usually falls into the sizzle bracket. Not always, but sometimes that's where it falls into the sizzle bracket.
Yep. I've just put the QR code up there if anybody does want to read the article that we wrote. It was how to be a good buyer. It's got a bit of a comparison table in there of what vendors do what when it comes to AI. And it talks through the process that I've just discussed there in terms of thinking about the governance, thinking about the process of buying tech these days with AI embedded.
And I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. No, then that's it. Thank you so much, James.
No worries, thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Have a good day.
Thank you, everybody.